this week's Casual Friday, I'm on a search for UFOs. I'm going to give you a tour of my office, and I'm going to invite you to finish it February, a knit-along challenge. Just like with my Technique Tuesday videos, if you want to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. So before we get started on my UFO search, I want to answer a question from last week's video where I was over dyeing this sweater, and I have a couple of announcements. So one of the questions that showed up in the comments last week was, why didn't this sweater shrink when it was in such hot water? And the answer to that is that it isn't hot water that causes wool to felt or shrink. It's water plus agitation or friction on the wool fibers. So you can felt wool in cold water. It just felts more easily the hotter the water gets. And the reason for that is that wool fibers have little scales that stick out, and as the wool heats up more and more, as the water temperature goes up, those scales open up more, and then if you apply friction to them, then they are going to felt more easily than if the water is cool and the scales aren't opened up quite as much. So the challenge when you're dyeing is that the hotter the water is, the more receptive the wool is to taking on the dye. So that's why I described that there were two different methods of tub dyeing. One could be done on the stove top and one could be done in a top-loading washing machine. But in the top-loading washing machine, it could take up to twice as much dye for the wool to dye the color that you want. And that's because you can't get the water temperature as hot, and you can't keep it at a hot level for as long as you can on the stovetop. So the challenge then is that you have to keep the dye water moving throughout the fabric so that every area of fabric has access to that dye. But anytime you stir, you're risking those fibers rubbing against each other. When the water is so hot, there's a greater chance of it felting. So that was what I was worried about as I was stirring, was that I knew that it would felt more easily with the same amount of stirring than it would if the water were cold. So I have a couple of announcements. The first one is that in this issue of Knit Scene magazine that came out this month, I have a technical knitting article on substituting German short rows for wrap and turn short rows that you might be interested in. I've been writing technical knitting articles for Interweave for since last summer. The articles started appearing this fall, and they'll continue to appear over the next few months. So the first article I had was in Interweave Knitwear, their fall-winter issue. And then I had the winter Interweave Knits article came out, and now this Knit Scene article. I'll have articles in Interweave Spring and Interweave Knits Spring and Knits Summer, and then again in the Knitwear Spring Summer issue. Knitwear comes out twice a year, but Knits comes out 4 times a year. So the second announcement is that the general registration for Yarnover, where I'll be teaching at the end of April, is now open. I had done a video on Yarnover a month ago talking about what it was and what you had to do to qualify for early bird registration, but now just general registration is open. I think I'm teaching 2 classes at Yarnover, and one of them I think has 5 or fewer spots left, and that one is the Knitting Refinements class. So if that's something that you're interested in taking from me, you might want to sign up for that sooner rather than later. So I've been planning for about 1.5 years that this February I would be working exclusively on unfinished projects. And it isn't that I've been procrastinating for 1.5 years, that I've been thinking, oh, I really ought to do that. It's that I knew that this February I would be doing that, and it will be something I will be doing every February from now on. Now, the reason that I didn't do it last year is because I spent the entire year of 2016 finishing unfinished projects. For the past 20 years, I have gradually evolved how I organize my knitting area as well as my office area into something that works really well for me. And this setup evolved because my needs changed. I had little kids, and then my kids were older, and now they've moved out of the house. And I was also changing other things that I was doing in my life. So as those things changed, my needs changed, and every time I changed my office situation, I kept the things that worked really well for me. I realized what worked really well and what I needed to keep doing, and then I would address other areas that weren't working so well. So before I show you how I have my office set up, I think it's helpful to understand what I learned about myself along the way, so that when you see what my office looks like, it will make sense to you about why I have it set up that way. Because everybody is different, and if I were to just show you my office, some of you might think, oh my gosh, that's the worst thing ever. How can anybody stand to work in an environment like that? And because everybody is different, and what they need and how they operate, how they share their space or don't share their space with other people in the house differs as well. So I want to just tell you what happened over the past 20 years and how I got to this place, and then I'll show you my office. So in 1997, my husband and I remodeled the main floor of our house, and we had to move out of the house in order to make that happen. And when we moved back into the house, my second daughter was born, and how we had the nursery and the bedrooms all set up changed. So shortly after we moved back into the house, I decided that I wanted to use a room down in the basement. We have an unfinished basement, but there's a finished room that had been set up as a dark room back in the 70s. I decided I wanted to use that room as a craft room. I could just keep my sewing machine set up. I could have shelves. I could have all of my knitting stuff in there. So we cleared that room out, and I got myself set up in there. And the first thing I did was I gathered up all of my knitting stuff that was stored in bags and boxes all over the house. I brought it all to that one room, and then I started sorting through it. So what I decided to do was sort the yarn in different categories. So I had like a lot of baby yarns, fingering weight yarns, and I had worsted weight and some bulky weights. So I had kind of 3 different categories that I divided my yarn up into, and I looking at what seemed to be a great way to organize, I put them all in bins with lids, and then put them on shelves in that craft room, and that worked pretty well for me. But at the same time, I was doing a lot of fiction writing. I was trying to write a novel, and I was very involved in writers groups. So between about 2000 and 2005, I was kind of on a knitting hiatus. I knit very rarely. Maybe if there was a baby gift I needed, I would go down and I would think, I'm going to make that fruit cap that I've made a million times as a gift, and I would go get that yarn out, and I would make the hat. And so that kind of storage system worked for me, because I was making a very specific thing that I'd made over and over again. But then in 2005, I kind of returned to knitting as a way of just being creative for the sake of being creative, because I lost my writing voice. I was having a lot of struggling a lot with my writing, and I just wanted to do something creative. So the problem I was having was I didn't really know what yarn I had, and it was all stored away in the basement in these bins. And so if I wanted to knit something, I would just go to the yarn shop, and I'd find a pattern, and I'd buy the yarn and come home. And I would have no idea that maybe I already had the correct yarn for that project. So I saw that wasn't working for me, and I thought, geez, I'd really like to have this room set up so I could see the yarn that I have. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to set it up with some shelves and have these cubes. And I'm going to set it up like a yarn shop and have all my yarn stored so that I can just come down, I can see what I have. Now the problem was I wasn't ever knitting in that room. It was still stored away down in the basement. And it had this fluorescent lighting in it, so that it was hard to see the true colors. And besides that, I'm partially colorblind, so that made it even bigger challenge. So I thought what I really need is to be in a room with natural lighting. So the room where I'm sitting right now is my current office, and that was the time I decided I need to be in a room with natural lighting, and then I could knit in that room as well. So I set this room up with my yarn on one wall and a chair on the other, and so I could sit there knitting and I could see my yarn all the time. I was constantly aware of what yarn I had, so that when it was time to do a new knitting project, the first thing I could do was look up at that wall, and I would already kind of know what I had. And I'm looking over here because that's where my yarn is. And that became very helpful to me. So I knew that that was something I needed to do. Now, in that original organization of my downstairs craft room, one of the things I did, as soon as I went through all of my yarn, then I went through all my pattern books. And one of the pattern books that I came across was this Rowan book. This is probably from 1989 or 1990. So when I was looking through this in probably 1999-ish, so maybe 10 years after this book came out, I was looking through it and I was thinking, geez, a lot of these people are still designing, and it's really amazing to see this. And boy, there's a sweater in here that I really liked. Let's see if I can find it. So I was looking through this and I found this page. Now, remember, this is like the year 1999 or something like that. So I saw this page and I saw at the bottom there was this cardigan, and I thought, boy, I really like that cardigan a lot. And so I sorted all my patterns out and I put them all away. Well, then the last thing that I had to do was go through all my project bags and find all the projects that maybe were unfinished and see what they were and do something about them. So the very first bag I opened was that sweater. I had knit that sweater 10 years ago. I had no memory of it. I just needed to be seamed up and maybe knit a collar for it or something, but I had all the pieces. I had no memory of it, and it was a complete shock to me. So that was confirmed to me that I need to be able to see my things in order to remember that I have them. Now, the problem with unfinished objects is that they are one of a kind. It's not like, oh, here's my wall of unfinished sweaters that I can put in on display. It's not like having all of your worsted weight yarn, sorted by color or something that you can see all the time and you know what you have. Unfinished projects are unique, and if they get put away somewhere where I can't see it, I will forget about it. And I do make a Ravelry project. Every time I start a new project, I always create a project page in Ravelry and keep track of my project as I'm knitting on it. But I rarely go back and look and see, well, what isn't finished and what should I go finish? That isn't something that I do. And so I know that about myself. So I did learn 20 years ago that when unfinished things go in a bag, it's like they don't exist anymore. So 2 years ago, I was in this office, and I have a high tolerance for clutter. It just doesn't bother me until it's actually physically in my way. So my desk will get, pretty piled up. I'll end up with 10 different balls of yarn and needles on my half-finished projects on my desk, and there'll be papers and stuff. And it isn't until I put something down and then a minute later can't find it that I go, oh, this is too much. And then I'll clear away about 80% of it, and it'll be clear enough, and then I can work again. So what tends to happen is that happens on my floor too. I'll get boxes or bags will get stacked up, and then it'll interfere with me, or I can't find what I'm looking for, and so I go through and I put it all away, and then everything's fine again. But 2 years ago, at the beginning of 2016, it had gotten to the point where I really couldn't. There really was not much floor space left. And the problem was I didn't have any room to put anything away. all of my storage area was full. So I knew I needed to do a complete, inventory and assessment of all of my stuff. So I used that Marie Kondo method of you go by category, you put everything on the floor, and then anything that you have to pick up everything and decide, do I really love this? Do I want to keep this? And then you put it away. So you're not taking things out that you're getting rid of. You're taking everything out and then you're only putting away what you want to keep. So I got rid of about half of my yarn that way. I donated it to the textile center. They have a annual garage sale every year, and so I got rid of it that way. So, and then I went through all my books and patterns again and reorganized all them. And then the last thing to do was to find every unfinished object in this office. So I went through every bin, every box, every bag that was still sitting here or that was stuffed in something else, and put them all on the floor to take a look at them. And I got a little sick to my stomach because there were more than 40 unfinished projects. And worse, there were 17 unfinished sock projects. So this was a complete shock to me that I had 17 unfinished sock projects, because I think of myself as somebody who doesn't have second sock syndrome. In fact, I would tell people, oh, I don't have second sock syndrome. As long as I like the yarn and the pattern, I'll finish the sock. And obviously that wasn't true. So I looked at the quantity of projects and I thought, in a given year, I usually complete between 35 and 55 projects. So that to me looked like a year's worth of knitting. And I decided in 2016 that was going to be my knitting. And I did make a few exceptions. I did do new projects if they were a gift. I don't have any problem finishing gifts because it's for a specific person. There's a specific deadline, usually their birthday, and I just soldier on right through it and I can get it finished. But when things are for me, a lot of times it's an experiment, or I wonder if I should do that, or that looks interesting, that looks like it would be fun to knit. And I'm not doing it for any specific purpose other than just experiencing the process of it. So completing it isn't always something I care about. But I also have a 3-week tolerance for how long I can work on something in one stretch. So if I am doing a gift, if it's like a blanket, I need a year to do a blanket, because I can only work on it in 3-week sections. So I'll work on it for 3 weeks and then I'll give myself a couple months to work on other things, and then I'll come back and I'll do the 3 weeks on the blanket and so on. And that way I can get it done in a year and not have it drive me insane. But if I'm knitting myself a sweater, often if it's a lot of cables, it's going to take me more than 3 weeks. So, and I know that about myself, so I know that especially if I don't start it until February or March, I'm not wearing it this season because I won't have a big enough break between when I first work on it and when I'll next work on it. So then I just wait till the next winter. But these things, they accumulate and you forget about them. So, and sometimes there's just some problem with it and I put it away and then I forget about it because I don't see it. So this is my problem with UFOs. So at this point, I have my office set up and organized in a way where I can see things. They're accessible to me. They're organized in a way that works for me to be able to get at them and put them away in a reasonable method. But the UFOs continue to be a problem. But during 2016, when I was finishing all of these projects, there's a group on Ravelry called Twin Cities Ravelers, and they have a challenge that they do. Every January they start an annual challenge of some sort. And in 2016 it just happened to be that it was WIP's Wipeout. So it was works in project, getting them off your needle. And I found out about it shortly after I'd started finishing all of these projects, and I thought, oh, this is great. So then I could post, here's what I finished this time, and here's the history of it, and here's the problem I had, and here's what I had to do, and so I was posting that, And people were like, oh, that's so inspiring that you're getting so many of your unfinished projects done. And then at some point during the year, I think it was the summer of 2016, somebody said, oh, every February I go through all my unfinished projects. That's all I do in February is work on unfinished projects. And I thought, well, that's brilliant. And that would solve my UFO problem where I don't see it. It would be an annual thing where I pull out every unfinished thing, evaluate what I have, decide if these are things I actually still love. Do I still want to continue doing them? And then if I don't, then I can cross that off my list, say, well, that's no longer an unfinished object. That's just available yarn, or that's trash, or that's, whatever. But I can deal with it. And so I decided, well, that's what I'm going to do every February from now on. But by the time last February came around, I just come off an entire year of finishing things. So I had a few things that were still left unfinished, but I was so sick of that. And those were the things that most of them I don't think I'm ever going to finish. So I just started knitting new things last year. And now it's going to be February, and I'm ready to address my UFOs again, because I don't really, again, know completely what's in there. I have a pretty good idea of certain things, but I don't know everything. So that's why I want to do a finish it February. And so what I'll be doing is every week in February, I'll show you what I finished that week, tell you a little bit about the story about that particular item, challenges that I had finishing it, and that sort of thing. But I want to start a thread in my Ravelry group as well called Finish It February. And if any of you would like to join me as a kind of a knit along, as an encouragement, a rah-rah cheerleading thing, I would invite you can photograph your pile of UFOs if you want to, or you can just post photos as you complete them and tell us a little story about your finished objects. So that's what my plan is for February. And my techniques videos on Tuesday will be related to finishing techniques as well. So if you have some specific finishing techniques that you would like to know about for the Finish It February, let me know. I have a couple of ideas, but I'm flexible about that. And I've already done 2 seaming videos the past couple of weeks, mattress stitch, and then for regular stockinette, and then for reverse stockinette. So those might be helpful. If you have any seaming to do and you're feeling nervous about or unsure about, those might be helpful. So, understanding a little bit about my whole process up to this point, and also my relationship, my need to be able to see things and my tolerance for clutter, I will now take you on a tour of my office. So I have bags all hanging on the window or on the wall right there. And then the top left, I have a lot of worsted weight yarn. And over on the top right is a lot of fingering weight and sock yarn. And then on the bottom half is various mixtures of different things. There's some hand-painted fingering weight on the... So this is most of my yarn that I look at. I really don't have much of a stash. I'm not a stasher. I have to know what I'm going to knit and then figure out the yarn. I'm very bad at having yarn and trying to figure out what to do with it unless it's a solid color worsted weight yarn or a ball of self-striping sock yarn. So then over here is my desk. This is about as clean as it ever gets. This is an IKEA hack of, it's a tall desk. The idea was I could stand at it and do finishing work, or I could sit at it at a tall, bar stool. It's never clear enough to do finishing work. If I need to seam something, I go down on the kitchen table. So this is not unusual. I've got a work in progress. I have something over here that's an idea that I don't want to forget about, so I'm not putting it away. I'm not ready to work on it just yet, but I don't want to forget about it. A big stack of scrap paper because I love to write things on notes. Computer, behind my computer, I have a jar of double points and some scissors, jar pen. These I use as tools to fix things a lot, cable needles, that sort of thing. This is a felted bowl that is now misshapen, but it's got my various pins for certified, let's see, certified knitting instructor, certified knitting teacher, and that's my master hand knitting pin right here. Notions bag, that blow yarn I knit on a much thicker needle or bigger needle with the leftovers, and I've been leaving it here because it's amazing to me how much it fluffed up, and I keep wanting to get some more blow yarn. Over here I have my scale and some stuff for doing business related stuff for my husband's business. And over here I've got different sorts. I've got a lot of double points in this drawer here, and these are other notions. This is things like I've got some more needle gauges, but like reinforcing yarn I've got here, highlighter tape, that kind of thing, some measuring tapes, and then up here is more measuring tapes and a lot of notion type stuff that I don't use very often, but I also have buttons here that I keep intending to sew onto old sweaters where I need to replace the buttons. So a lot of notions type of thing here. So here is another wall where I have yarn and books. Now these books are stitch dictionaries and then design books, because those are the things that I use most often when I'm sitting at my desk. So I want to just be able to reach over and grab those. And then these other bins, some of them have certain types of yarn in them, and some of them have projects, and some of them are unfinished projects, and then some of them have things like classroom samples or swatches, things I've either done for videos or classes or for articles, different things. So you can see in the bottom two, I've got some Post-it notes. One of those says UFOs, hands and neck. The other says UFO socks. So if I'm working on something in the middle of the year and I'm not finishing it, then I have a place to put those. This bin right here is, I think it's sweaters. I think that's what's in there. And then at the bottom right here is a blanket that I worked on. It was in my 2016 UFOs where I finished all of the squares, and then this year I need to sew them all together and do that. So I know what's in there. Then I have yarns, specific types of yarns. Like this is all dishcloth cotton. I can see some of the colors in there. I don't know all the colors, but I know that that's dishcloth cotton. This is gray yarn. That's a long story. That's mostly just gray yarn. This is sock yarn leftovers. I usually have about 25 grams of sock yarn left over when I complete a pair of socks, and I just wind it up and put it in there. Every once in a while I need to use it, or I meet somebody who's making a modular blanket with sock yarn and I let them dig through there. This is all baby wool from when my niece and nephew were babies and my kids were babies, and I just have so many colors because a lot of times you don't use very much of any one color. So the rare occasion I need a baby gift these days, this is where I dig for it. Then this is this little smaller IKEA thing is mostly genealogy stuff. I do a lot of genealogy. That's part of why my office got so crammed by 2016. So I moved a lot of those boxes out of here because there just isn't room for them. But that case has got some photos and various things in there. So this is the wall that's usually behind me, either when I'm doing my Techniques Tuesday videos or I'm sitting down for the Casual Friday videos. So I have a curtain wire that hangs around the two walls of my office. And this one is just with some decorative things ahead. I have my ball winder and Swift right there because I use them at my desk, so I just leave them within reach. this is a lot of fingering weight yarn that I just hung up in rainbow style to get it out of the way. And these books tend to be filed by category. So I've got reference books over on the left, and then I have books of a certain type of category like mittens or socks or Aran or Fair Isle, and the second one down here, the second on the left, the second shelf, that's things like No Idle Hands, The Social History of Knitting. I've got History of Hand Knitting, Knitting Around the World, those kinds of books. And then I've got some Aran type of books over there. And then up here in the right-hand shelf are a lot of my older books that are mostly pattern books. I don't buy books that are just patterns very much unless they have a really good reference section in them. But in the old days, I used to, especially for kids stuff, I used to buy a lot of books. So these bins here, the one where you can see a lot of yarn crammed up against the sides, this is the problem. I did stash this yarn. This is yarn stash for doing videos, and so I was, buying stuff that was on sale, and that was a mistake. I'm terrible at stash yarn. I shouldn't have done that. Because a lot of it is like, oh, these are ugly. I don't even want to use them for swatches. There are some of these bins have UFOs in them. Some of them have things I've designed and I have samples in them. And I need to finish the patterns. And then at the bottom, the very bottom one, I have a blanket that I'm working on as a baby gift. It's a design I'm working on, and the baby's due in May, so I'll be finishing that up. And then this basket at the bottom has little baby things that I've made over the years for my kids or my niece or something, and they're just little reminders of those particular things. So that is and then I have blocking squares hanging on the wall there, and I have a blocking pad. It's actually a quilter's ironing thing, but I like the grid, and so I tend to block things on this, and it stores away really easily. So that's my office. It's really hard to get the whole thing in here because of how small the room is, but that's my teleprompter. But so that's my office. And the one thing I wanted to show you was how I store my circular needles. I posted a photo of this on Ravelry earlier this week, and the response to it was very amusing to me, because this is actually the perfect storage solution for me. I spent a long time trying to figure out how I wanted to store my needles, and some people were so horrified by how they call it messy and tangled, or they how would they ever know if they were pulling the right needle out. And what it is, I mostly knit on 32-inch needles. They're for everything, but there's some exceptions. But these are by size. So I've got 00, 0, every single size, every single European size. I've got 2 different sizes of US 6. I've got the 4mm and the 4.25mm. Because I have needles that are different, and for me this is perfect. And I made the width of each slot about I think 3/4 of an inch wide for the smallest ones, and then they went to an inch wide, and then for the very biggest ones they're 1.5 inches. So this works really well for me, and I just find the size I need and see the cable that's sticking out from that slide, and I pull it out. Some people apparently would just find this to be a nightmare. But again, because I need to see what I have, and because of the way that I tend to not put things away, I let them stack up. This is very easy for me to put away, much easier than trying to file something in an individual bag and an individual file fold notebook or binder or something. It just wouldn't work for me. So that's my system. I designed it for myself based on other ideas I saw and figured out what would work best for me. Okay, so I think I have found all of my things. There's that sweater I was telling you about from 1990. There's another sweater in here that's like a half-finished Norwegian thing, which I have no idea. I know who I was knitting that for, but that was 1990 probably as well, and I'm not going to finish that. I know that. So that's yarn that I have to do something with. This is a sweater that I bought as a kit because there's no way I could pick out that many colors on my own, and thinking I was going to make it for my husband, who never said he wanted it and certainly didn't want it. And so there's a lot of yarn in here. I don't know. I'd forgotten about this bin. I don't think I picked it out a couple of years ago. So that probably is never going to get finished. This is a Lizard Ridge blanket that I finished all the squares for in 2016, and now I need to put it together. This is a sweater that has 3 sleeves because I screwed it up once. And I was knitting it for a friend. She was going to make me a coat, and I was going to make her a sweater. And I put it aside because of the 3-sleeve issue. And then she changed sizes, and I was trying to figure out how to add side panels. And then we haven't really talked to each other for a few years, so I don't think I'm going to finish this. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I'm not going to finish this. This is a sweater that was an idea that I had a number of years ago, and I figured out, well, my idea maybe would work, but I didn't really want the sweater anymore. The yarn I like, but I'm not. This is from one of the 2016 things I never got to because I didn't think I ever would do it. This is the sweater I just saw up on the shelf when I was showing you my yarn. I don't even know what it is. So it's probably something I was designing myself. But I don't know if I was intending to rip it out or not. So this is a sweater that I was designing a year ago after the election. It was an idea I had, and this is, hand-painted yarn, and you could see where the change occurred in the middle. So I needed to rip that out. I don't know that's not getting done anytime soon. That needs some design work. This is a blanket I'm working on as a baby project. So this is probably 1/3 of it. There'll be 2 more panels that I'll join together and finish sometime in the next couple months. This is a pair of socks for my brother that just needs ends woven in. This is a pair of socks for somebody that it could either be me or my mother or my kids. We all wear the same size, and the ends need to be woven in. This is a pair of socks where I need to do the heels and then do the toes. I think I was using these for a video back in September, so those need to get completed. This is, I think there's only 1 sock to this so far, and I wasn't loving the colorway. I think that's kind of why I put it to the side, but it'll get done at some point this year. This sock is not on needles, but this is the one I was using the flexi flips with to try out, so I'll have to finish them with the flexi flips as well. It's really dark yarn, it's hard to see, so I was struggling with that a little. This is a project left over from 2016 that I'd left to the end because the reason I put it to side was it's really cute. They're like hedgehog mittens, but that stitch pattern is so tedious, and it's for my nephew's wife, who I really don't know very well, and it's just a commitment. It's not like she asked me to knit these, so these are probably going to get ripped out. Let's see. This is a sweater I started last year. And this is one of those things where it's 3 weeks and then I had to put it to the side. So I think the only thing that has to be done on this is, well, the only thing. What's done is the back and the fronts. It needs the sleeves and the button bands. So that'll get done sometime this year. This is a sock. This is one of the 17 socks I had left in, that I had in 2016, but I never did the second one because it's boring. This really repetitive cables. But I'll finish those. This is a pair of gloves, liner gloves that I started for my husband years ago. And when I took them out in 2016, there was like so many things I would do differently if I were starting them now. I just need a couple of fingers to complete on the second one and then weave in the ends. So that will probably get done in February for sure. This is a top, a summer top in linen that I did last spring. I think the whole thing is done. I think it just needs the seaming. It needs to be seamed and ends woven in. So it's kind of a neat thing. I think it was one of those Barocco. I don't know if it's an Oregon. It's probably an Oregon design. I really like her design. So it's really, really a nice thing. So I'll finish that up so I can wear it this spring. So this is a cardigan I started last summer that I've been wanting to knit for a couple of years called Stripes Gone Crazy. And when I went on, we have a shop hop here in the spring, so I bought the yarn for that. It was a gradient set, and because I have colorblind issues, I have a hard time picking more than one color, or picking more than 2 colors to go together. So I asked for help. I found a gradient set that I thought would be really cool to do the stripes, and then I needed help for the background. So they were very helpful to me. So this is definitely going to get finished. I really just love this this sweater. Oh, this is not going to get done. This is a pattern I wanted to do called phalanges because of the way it's a fingerless gloves pattern, and I really like the way it's an interesting fingers thing, but I find the stitch pattern for the body of the mitt to be very annoying to me. It's not a reflection on the designer, it's just a reflection on what I can tolerate. So I'll probably rip these out and then do a different pattern, but do the fingers. So this is a no-go. I'm not going to finish these. These will be done. I think that's it. Oh no, I have one more. This is a raccoon hat. I don't actually know if I'm going to finish this one. I've done a raccoon hat before, and I need to do a pattern for, and I don't know why I was doing this one in this yarn. Maybe it was just, I don't know. I'm not. So either this is going to get finished or ripped out because I don't know. It would probably be easier for me to just start over because I have no idea what I'm doing. Since it's my own design, I'm just not sure of that. So those are my things. So I'm going to evaluate what is still on my plate and what is not, and then what I'm going to be doing for this week. And I didn't add up the numbers, but I'll be adding them up on the screen. So that's it. Now I have to go and clean all of this up and sort through it and make my decisions. And then next Friday, I'll show you what I got done and tell you a little bit more about them. So I hope you'll join me for Finish It February, that you can find your UFOs and decide what is just not worth ever completing, what you might want to complete this year, and what you think you might want to work on this February. So the idea is that you won't start anything new in February, you'll just work on the things that you already have on the needles. And I hope you'll join me for that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.